It's not every day that I get to talk to someone who had their story in the Washington Post, but I do today. Welcome, Bob Bryntwick.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, thanks for doing this, first of all. It's quite the story, so let's just get it all out there. So this is my version of things.
Okay.
In a story entitled DNA Doesn't Lie, People Lie,
Right.
you found out through modern DNA testing, first of all, that the person who you thought was your father actually sold several infant children that your mother delivered to adoptive families.
No, I didn't find it out through DNA. I was actually there when he was selling them off. I was the oldest child, so I
knew at the time. But you kind of knew, or you didn't know? You knew.
I knew, yeah.
You knew, okay.
I knew he was selling them off, and as they came out, he was basically selling them off.
You knew your mom had a baby every year for 10, 11 years or whatever.
And they were always at home.
Right.
Pretty much every single one of them was home births. And I was there I'm a young child, and I'm hearing my mother screaming either on the main floor or second floor, depending upon where we were. That was something you had to remember.
You were a child yourself. You were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old kind of thing.
Yes. I mean, obviously when I was 2 or 3, they were coming out every year. So when I was 2 or 3 or 4, I didn't really know. I knew they just disappeared. And
this was just normal for you.
I had no recollection of any of them until I was probably about 4 or 5.
Okay. Some of the babies stayed and you grew up with them, and some of them did not. Is that fair to say?
Yes. My sister, she's now the eldest in her full family, a full sib family, Barbara. She was the first born from Mike Mitchell, and she stayed. And my mother, I think, had every intention to just have a family. She liked to have children. Her mother had a lot of children. And she wanted to have a lot of children for some reason, even though she couldn't afford it. And then all of a sudden, they kept on disappearing. And after Barbara, and I believe the reason was because the one right after Barbara was a twin, actually, Sharon, and had a twin sister. Mm-hmm. And that became overwhelming for my mother. And it was around that time that my mother actually reached back to her family, her oldest sister, Catherine, and asked her to send her oldest daughter, Sophie, to come and help out with the kids. And I think that's when all of a sudden the selling off the babies in the baby market back in Montreal started happening.
I want to point out that it wasn't illegal to do this in the 50s to put up a baby for essentially sell a child.
Right.
In Canada or the United States, the unusual part of this story is there's multiple children from the same parent, same mother
and father.
And what the article goes into a lot of depth about this. This is post World War II, so there's pressure on a lot of people to have babies. Yeah. And there's actually somewhat, if maybe people can't have children for whatever reason, they don't have their own children, but there's a demand for Jewish children.
Yes.
So there was actually a lot of extra value in these particular children because Mike was Jewish. Is that correct?
Yes.
So your mother, Anne, was not Jewish, but Mike was.
That's right.
So, or they had to, quote unquote, look Jewish or whatever.
They had to fake it, basically. My mother never went to any of these meetings with the lawyer and the doctor or whoever had to, arrange for these adoptions. So I think Mike learned from his mistakes because the very first adoption he put up was Sharon, and he ended up putting Anne Bryntwick as the mother. And this caused a problem, I think, and because you weren't allowed to adopt if you're a Jewish couple, you have to adopt Jewish babies, and you can't adopt and the Jewish baby is only Jewish because of the mother. That's how they count Jewishness, is it's based upon the mother. And of course, Anne Bryntwick didn't sound like a Jewish name, and I think that was the issue. And the very next adoption, I forget who it was. I think it was Rain. I believe she was, her mother was named as a Jewish mother, and it happened to be, I think, Mike Mitchell's mother's name. I'm not quite sure, but I think that's where, Risa did all the research, so she should know. So that's basically how he kind of sharpened up his act and said, okay, well, we'll have to put in a Jewish name as a mother. And he never put himself in as a father, I don't think. I don't think they cared. They just needed to know that the mother was Jewish.
We have some time, so I just want to
Sure.
kind of paint a bit of a picture here. So you're growing up in Quebec, in Montreal,
Yes.
in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
So describe your mother for me. What she likely had 11 children in total, but
I think it was probably 13 or 14 in total.
total.
Yeah.
So just tell me about your mom.
I thought she was a very nice woman. To me, she was really good. She kept a very neat house, gave us a lot of sense of pride in who we were and our surroundings, even though they were very poor. Had a sense of pride for herself as well. Did a lot of cooking and cleaning and sewing. She was very good with the sewing machine. She never worked outside the family, so she never brought in any revenue. But she was a very diligent mother, did well with the kids, was a good disciplinarian, so you couldn't talk back to her because she'd, back in those days, give you a slap, and usually across the bum. So pretty nice lady, and I loved her as a mother. She didn't really have that kind of relationship with my sister Barbara, but other than that, she was very loving to pretty much everyone else in the family.
Now, as you look back, you didn't have a lot of money.
No.
But so what did you think at the time?
Yeah, we were in a very poor neighborhood, so most of the people that are around us probably had a little bit more coming in. I mean, they got toys for Christmas, which we never did, and a whole bunch of stuff, but at least we were well fed. And I just thought this was a normal situation. I was a little bit embarrassed when when I began to understand that, being a bastard in this society, because, I basically got labeled as one. I forget how.
So you're essentially growing up, but there's no father in the home.
No father, and I knew that my father, or who I thought was my father, wasn't married to my mother. So that was a little embarrassing. And, there were secrets that you wanted to keep about the family, about the fact that my mother kept on having children and they kept on disappearing. That was something that you had to keep kind of a secret. There were some secrets in the family that I knew were unusual.
Right. So again, I'm just trying to paint a picture here. So tell me about the man you always thought was your father.
Mike was a very tall guy. He was about 6'2", very fancy dresser. Always came to visit us in a black Cadillac. He loved Cadillacs and always brand new and all that kind of stuff. Never found out how he enjoyed this lifestyle and what he did for a living. Even now, I don't think even his kids know what he did for a living. But I think he was in the political system in Montreal, and I don't know what he was doing there, but that's what he was doing.
But he never actually lived with you as a family or anything.
No.
But you thought he was your father, and
everyone
thought he was a father. And
he told me he was my father. Yeah.
So
my mother and my brother.
So he would drop by a couple times a year.
No, more frequently.
Oh, but he just didn't live with you, but he was there more frequently.
Every couple of weeks or so, he would stop by for the weekend.
Oh.
And sometimes he would take us out, and we'd go riding in his big fancy car, and out to the suburbs somewhere. And I think we had a few picnics a couple of times with my mother and the kids. And then he would stay the weekend, and then he would disappear, and he'd be off for about a couple of weeks, and then he'd come back again. So he was a fairly frequent visitor to the family.
So you had a relationship with him then?
No, he actually never started a relationship with me.
But you saw him a lot.
I saw him a lot,
okay.
But the conversations, etc., were always with my mother and my older brother. And
so you think he deliberately didn't want to make a connection with the children that were in the house?
I think so. I do believe so.
Okay.
He made a little bit better of a connection, I think, to Barbara. He would, do more with her. I think he knew that I wasn't his son, but I didn't know that until much, much later.
Right. Well, okay.
But yeah, he never really wanted a relationship with me.
Right.
And but he had a fairly decent relationship with my mother and my older brother.
So in the article, you say this about your mother. Every year and a half, she was having a baby. The newborn children were always gone after a few days or weeks. No one explained what happened to them. Now, your mother, Anne, in the article again, it said, every once in a while she had seemingly bouts of, this weighed heavily on her, I gather.
I didn't know why it weighed heavily on her. All I knew is that she
Being a
would,
child,
Yeah, I had no idea. All I know that I remember when I was about 4 or 5, and my younger sister Barbara was about, I guess, 4. We were about a year and a half apart. We heard our mother wailing like crazy downstairs. We thought she was going crazy, and I grabbed her and we decided to hide in the closet until all the noise died down. And she had been, every now and again she would go into this grief thing or whatever that was. It was quite sad, but I had no idea. I never even connected the two together with, she had just had a birth or whatever. All I know is that every now and again we had this issue with my mother having this strong emotional reaction to something that would cause us to be very concerned.
This cycle of events just sort of ended when you were about 9.
Well, it ended in a very particular way. What had happened was Michael came along. He was my youngest brother at that particular point. He's
Right.
8 years younger than me, and she wanted Michael. So she wanted to keep Michael, and there was some discussion about that. I don't think Mike Mitchell was very pleased, but my brother had quit going to high school in grade 10, and he could have gone to grade 11, but he decided to start earning some money for the family. So that made us a little bit more independent from this money that was coming in from the kids. We weren't getting a lot of money for the children. He was getting probably about $10,000 a piece, I think, from his scheme, but we were getting a small amount, and that wasn't enough to really do anything for us. So my brother quit, went to work at Dusky's Hardware in Montreal, and then could afford it. So my mother decided that she can now afford to keep her kids. So she had Michael. And then right after, a year later, she had, we called him Richard, although he's now known as Bram. And Mike at that particular point refused to let her keep Richard. And there was a big argument about this. He finally took Richard away from us, and that was the last straw for my mother. And there was a moment when my brother was telling me that my mother was going to go out for a bit because Mike was coming over, and they were going to end their relationship.
I guess she wanted to keep Richard.
She wanted to keep Richard, yeah.
And then Mike came in and grabbed the baby right out of one of your siblings'
Barbara's
arms.
hands, yeah.
Barb's.
Yeah.
And that perhaps what set your mother off?
I believe so. I think that was
the last straw.
The end of it, the last straw. She didn't want to do this anymore, and she decided that she could now support her kids, and she didn't need him, and didn't need whatever revenue was coming in because of it, and she would move on.
Right.
And I remember seeing, I was on the second floor looking out a little window with my brother at my shoulder, and I see this Cadillac, which I knew was my father, who I thought was my father, drive up. I saw my mother get in on the passenger side, sat there for about 15, 20 minutes doing some kind of conversation, got out, slammed the door, he drove off, and that was the end of Mike Mitchell. And that's when...
So you never saw him again after that?
I saw him the year my mother died, about maybe a month after my mother died. I was on mountain sites at the time. I was living with my brother. I was going to university.
Okay.
And my brother saw Mike Mitchell right at there was a Depiner little corner store, and he saw him there, and he said, "Look, there's Mike."
So 10 years later.
Yeah, and I recognized him, and we didn't wave or anything. He saw us, and then he just got quickly into his car, drove off, and that was actually the year that he left Montreal and went out to BC.
The father.
1967,
Mike.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew that my father had another family, was married, had children as well.
Right.
And I always wondered, well, how could he do this? How could he have family at the same time as he had us and yet not help us in any way to support us and let us really live a very menial existence? And so when I eventually got older, I was trying to think about ways I could find out a little bit more about my father. I was just about to turn 70.
Right.
I was pretty sure he was dead by then, and I decided to pursue his side of the family to find out who he was.
Right.
I wanted to piece together some kind of an idea as to who was this man
Right.
that could do that.
So
And
just again to paint a picture here, was it sort of every other child was put up for adoption, and
every single one,
pardon me,
every child.
every child some were
All the way
kept by
through.
your mom,
Yeah.
but some were but there was 5 or
There
6 consecutive children.
There were 8. He had 8 children, and 6 were put up for adoption.
Right. 6.
So he had, my sister was the oldest, Barb. She was kept with us. And then there were about 5 before Michael. And then Michael, who was 8 years younger than me, he was kept. And then Bram was the last, the 6th one to finally be
Right.
put up
And
for
the way the
adoption.
article is written, and I'm sure the writer had many sleepless nights about how to write it,
Yes.
because the fact that Mike ended up having his own family
At the same time.
at the same time with 8 children is a bit of a
Yeah.
bombshell to me in the article, because even my wife, we were kind of reading it and she hadn't finished it. You got to finish the article, because there's this bombshell at the end where it turns out he had this other family simultaneously, and there's probably about 8 of them,
Yes.
8 kids,
8. Yeah.
and they lived a pretty
Same number.
standard middle-class lifestyle
Yes.
by the sounds of it.
Well supported, yeah.
I mean, $10,000 is a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money today, a fortune back then. And
Yeah.
if he was, that was probably just maybe his cut too. I mean, there's probably commissions being paid by certain people. So the money is going to his family, his middle-class family, and not your own.
That's right.
And that it wasn't going, as the quote goes, it was going to feed his family. It wasn't going to feed ours. And
Yeah.
you're pretty angry in that article. I could feel
Yeah.
it coming off the page.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I felt resentful and a little angry that he couldn't find a better way to be supportive of us. I understand now that it was a big secret, so it's hard to, support a family when you're running kind of a secret situation. But yet again, he should have realized that when he comes in with his fancy clothes and his big fancy car in the neighborhood where, the cars are all jalopies and things, and people are running around in rags, that that is something that's going to puzzle a lot of people, and is going to make me feel like there's got to be money there to be able to be spent on us. And yet all you would do is, spend time with my mother and give us maybe 50 cents to go and buy some ice cream to get rid of us for a while.
But you knew at the time that there seemed to be a little bit, when he's around, there's a little bit more money around.
It
You
was
ate
obvious.
better and that sort of thing.
It was obvious to me. Even as a young kid, I knew that here's a guy that had a lot of money, and there we were. And I was one of the poorest kids from all of my friends. I mean, all my friends were doing a lot better than me, and yet here I have this father that had more money than virtually any of their fathers, I could tell, and yet, we weren't being treated very, very fairly by him.
When my parents died, it's like it spurred me to do a lot of family tree research. So so there was lots of. I had the advantage of having the internet at my disposal, even 20 years ago. And so lots of ordering of birth and marriage and death certificates from the old country, Scotland. Yeah. But your family tree found you. In a sense, that's how I kind of see it anyway.
Very true.
Did you send a DNA sample to Ancestry.com then?
Yeah, I went to Ancestry first. My motivation was to find out a little bit about my father. I didn't think there was any way I could find out anything about my siblings, because they disappeared. From my point of view, they were gone. I had no idea.
Right.
Even with DNA, I didn't think any of them would be looking for me or for the family. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was just about to turn 70, and I thought, okay, let me see if I can find his family, because I wanted to find out who he was. I wanted to talk to his family, his current family that grew up with him. I wanted to find somebody who knew him. And, of course, my adoptees, my half-sibs, they didn't know anything about him. So I wanted to find out about him. My motivation was, what is this guy all about? So that's when I put my Ancestry DNA in there. And then Sharon popped up. And she comes along and says,
And she's a half
she's
sibling.
a half sibling. I didn't know it at the time.
Yes,
She
but
comes
there's this
along-
sort of a partial match.
Yeah,
Right. That's
and so
that's
she
how it comes up.
yeah, she comes along and says, "Oh, I think we may be close relatives or family. I'm not
So she
sure."
contacts you.
Yeah, she contacted
So
me.
it turns out she was doing a lot of her own.
She was
research.
checking out for her twin sister.
So
And that's
independently,
Yes.
these other half siblings at different times
Yes.
are also signing up with Ancestry.com or 23andMe.
Yeah.
And then in various ways, you start
Finding
getting connected with these lost
Yeah.
siblings.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, you find out that Mike isn't your biological father. And someone told you that, again, in the article, very dramatic. It said it was
Risa told me he wasn't my father.
So she figured out, everyone's kind of doing their own sleuthing on their own time. As the article says, she had a very difficult conversation with you, and you didn't, that was a shock for you.
It was a shock. It wasn't difficult because I actually liked the fact that he was my father, because I didn't like him very much.
Right.
But the funny thing is I was kind of stupid about this, because when Sharon came on with the results that she did, the only reason I knew she was a sister of mine is because on her birth certificate, Anne Bryntwick was her mother. So I said, "Sharon, you're not a close relative. You're a family member." And then so I got curious about that, because it looked like it was a fairly distant relationship. Why wasn't it immediate family? So I had my brother submit a test, and her submit a test to a lab in Oakville. And when the results came back, they were 99% family, and I was 39%. And I'm thinking, wait a second.
That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. How come I'm, like we have the same father, we have the same mother. What is this? And I didn't put it all together. And I was, still working, so maybe I was busy doing it, but I think I was just stupid about it.
Right.
And then that's when Risa had pointed that out, then it all began to click to me and say, well, now I can understand where, Sharon and Michael are definitely, totally from the same parents, and I'm not.
I can relate to the family tree research part, because you're doing it. When I did it, it was kind of backwards. And there were little mysteries that were kind of solved, like my grandmother and grandfather turned out to be first cousins, which was common back then. But that was a bombshell for me.
Yeah.
Because, well, wait a second, that means, we share great whatever it is, great grandparents or whatever it is. So everyone had their own reason to be doing their own searching. For instance, as you say, one was searching for a lost twin.
Yep.
One was, I think she had cancer. And
yes,
again, common reasons people start searching up for their birth parents, because she had cancer and she was worried about her own daughter.
that was Risa.
And so everyone had their own reasons.
Yep.
And the surprise was that there were all sorts of full and partial matches. So how did you find it? Was it a phone call, a letter, email, or?
Well, Risa got, I guess she got kind of tired of the fact that 23andMe wasn't getting her any more information.
Right.
She's very curious, and she decided to go into Ancestry, where I was. And then all of a sudden I pop up, and then she says, okay, so let's look at the centimorgans, the amount of relativity we have with each other through DNA. And then the numbers were definitely, not supporting us having the common father, only the common mother. And this is all communication via texts, because what happens is Ancestry says you can email, and then it'll be the go-between. And then if you send someone an email, which I did to Risa, saying, well, why don't you email me directly at my Gmail account? So we began to do kind of text messaging that kind of way, or just emailing each other. And that's when she finally said in a text to me that I have shocking news for you, or whatever. I forget what she'd said, that you're actually not, you don't have the same father as I do. And I thought, really? And then it finally, I figured, she was right.
To this day, you don't know who your real father.
I have an inkling as to who he may be. There were 5 brothers that came to Canada. I found out recently from one of my first cousins that all the brothers were actually born in Ukraine. I always thought I was half Ukrainian and half Jewish because my mother was Ukrainian Orthodox, and I had a Jewish father, whom at that particular point I thought was Mike Mitchell, who's Jewish. But
Right.
then I found out from my first cousins on my father's side that there were 5 brothers, all born in the Ukraine, who then moved to Poland and grew up in Poland. So actually, I'm full Ukrainian, which is I'm prideful with the fact that all the things that are going on
Right.
with Ukraine right now made me feel like a good identity there. And I found out that out of the 5 brothers, I've kind of narrowed it down to 2, and maybe eventually one of them will eliminate the possibility, and I'll actually know who my real father is.
So your mom died when you were a teenager, is that?
Yeah, I was 18.
And then, by the sounds of it, you all kind of scattered and moved on with your life. So
Pretty much.
through your 20s and 30s, were you still in touch with them, or did they everyone just went their own way? Or
We were in touch, but my sisters moved out to BC and started their own families in BC. There wasn't much contact with them. My brother moved to, my brother stayed in Montreal for a while. We had a pretty rocky relationship. I think he had done his duty as an older brother to be, I guess, father figure for the family from all the way from when he was 18 till 16 until he was about 24, 26, something like that when my mother finally died. And I think he was fed up and he wanted to pursue his life, and he went away and did his thing and stayed in Montreal. We had him over every now and again, and my wife and I married when I was 22. And we had him over there, and then he eventually moved to Toronto. And until we moved to Toronto, we had a relationship that was off and on. But our relationship with my younger brother, he just took off. He was sent to Weardale House, and he escaped there within about 6 months and was dragged back within a year, and then finally went to my sister's in BC. And then we lost contact with Michael. I hadn't even had contact with Michael for 34 years, my youngest brother.
so, as the title of the article suggests, DNA doesn't lie. Are you glad you know all of this?
That's, by the way, that's Reese's quote, just to let you know as a
Okay.
perspective. I'm glad it all came out. I love my family. I didn't realize that even after 60 years of not knowing them, that I could get to know them very well and feel them in my life as well as I do. It's been now 4 or 5 years since we've started getting to know each other.
And you've connected. It hasn't been easy, I'm sure, with the pandemic, but you've had reunions and things.
We have. We've connected. Some of us connect better than others. Some of us are a little bit more reserved.
It's a lot of people.
A lot of people, yeah. And some people that only thought that they may have just one sibling or no siblings. They just want to find out about their mother and father, and all of a sudden they have this huge family to put in place. That's kind of a daunting task. So, but I've enjoyed the experience. I think it's worked out very, very effectively for me, for my own mental growth, for my emotional growth, and I really enjoy reaching out to my siblings and letting them know me a little bit better and letting them know their story. They needed to know their story, and Barbara knew the story as well. But she wasn't as talkative, and she didn't want to get involved in the beginning with all this stuff. It wasn't until some real efforts on Reese's part to get her connected to us that she finally did connect. And so, somebody had to kind of let people know why this mysterious thing happened. I want to give a shout out to my cousins on my father's side. Not that I'm going to name any of them. But they had submitted their DNA through, I think it was 23andMe. I'm not sure. Yeah, 23andMe. So when I submitted my DNA into 23andMe, I came up with the first cousin. And we connected. And she said, well, how could this be? I mean, how could you be a first cousin? And I said, well, this is what I think happened, whatever. And she was really, really nice. She opened up. She was the one that told me, well, there were 5 brothers. She was the one that told me that I have she had a sister and a brother as well that were my first cousins. She had a couple of other people that had shown up on 23andMe that were also my first cousins from another brother. So, the things began to fill in. And then we had a really nice reunion in Montreal when we came for the reunion for our first reunion. through my half-sibs with Bram and Michael. I brought Michael to Montreal as well. When we had our first reunion there, I also decided to have dinner with my first cousins. And they were very welcoming. It was just beautiful. They welcomed me into the family. One of my first cousins, Johnny, was checking out my hands. He says, "Yeah, you have hands of, one of my,
Right.
one of my fathers. They feel like it," and all that kind of stuff. So that was really, really nice. So it's kind of nice to be welcomed by a family that you didn't even know you're related to. And now my question is, okay, let me fill out. I want to get to know what these men were like, these 5 men,
Right.
and how they got to be where they were.
So the 5 men, one of which is probably your father.
Yeah, is my father, but I just don't know which.
Yes.
Sooner or later, the mystery may be solved.
Oh, I don't know how.
They're all working on it. Well, it just takes a DNA test. That's all it'll take.
Mike's family, they don't want anything to do with this story.
They don't want anything to do with it, and neither does my half-brother or potentially half-brother or half-sister on my father's side. They don't want to have anything to
Right.
do with me.
And I could
either.
get that. I
Yeah.
get that. But
Yeah.
which it could, this kind of stuff can blow up a lot of families, I suppose, right?
I
It's
actually had a conversation with David Mitchell, which is one of the mid children
right.
on the Mitchell side. He wasn't connected to me in any way, but he wanted to know a little bit about, he didn't believe, Risa, that his father, whom he thought was a really upstanding gentleman,
Right.
had any other family or life other than his own. And so I said, well, call me or I'll call you and I'll talk about what I know about your father. And then we had a very long conversation for about an hour and a half. He was a very nice guy. And I think Naomi's going to be visiting with him fairly soon in April sometime in Calgary to talk a little bit more directly with him and see if she can get into his siblings as well to get some communication going there.
You're very well adjusted about all of this. It's I guess you've lived with it for a few years now, but
Well, I've had my wife has a lot to do with my adjustment, to tell you the truth. We met as high school sweethearts, got married when I just finished university. She brought me out of my shell. I had a big shell around me, a big wall around me. I remember there are a few songs in my life that I would identify with. I'm a rock, I'm an island, the Garfunkel hit
Yes.
there, because I always kept my feelings buried. I remember when the Supremes came out with Love Child, I identified with that because I was a love child, basically. I didn't realize how true that was. Now that I
something was
understand that
resonating.
I
with
was
you.
basically only one child to this guy that probably didn't even know I existed. And then, of course, these things play in your mind. And she brought me out of my shell. She worked very hard to kind of make me emotionally.
This is over 40 or 50 years, you mean?
No, this was
Just the last 5 years.
No. I'm talking about when we first met.
Right.
I was quite shut off at 18.
You were a project for her.
Yeah, and
Yes,
she
okay.
got into psychology, so it became a good project for her, for
Of
sure.
course, yes.
And then she brought me out of my shell, brought me out of my emotional disconnect. And that's where the adjustment came from. And her family were terrific. I didn't have a really good family relationship. I was the kind of guy that, as long as I was doing well in school, Bobby was there to do for himself. I was a middle child, basically, in my family.
Right.
And it was kind of like, not ignored, but, as long as he was doing okay, we don't have to worry about him. And it was kind of like, okay, well, now that I'm an adult, I've got to get connected to my emotions, and I can't just distance people away from me. And she was very good at doing that. So my good adjustment comes from my wife and all her diligence around keeping me sane.
Did you grow up going to church or anything? Or?
Well, my mother never went to church, but she grew up as an Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox person. So we celebrate Easter and we celebrate Little Christmas as well as the regular Christmas. And my brother took up Catholic faith because I think his father was a Ukrainian Catholic, Alex. And so he grew up in the Catholic faith, but by the time I was 8 or 9, I had no faith. I mean, I didn't believe in God, or I'm not really.
So you were. It took a toll on you. Whatever was going on around, whether you understood it or not.
Yeah,
You were 8, 9. You were.
it has a toll. Yeah,
You were a cynical, hard
Yeah.
edge.
yeah. Bright guy, so that's about the only thing that kept me sane was the fact that I was able to get into university. I was able to. I never got a scholarship, but I was able to pay my own way.
Right.
I was able to take my own path, and I think I'm the only one that ever went to university within my family. So that was always a sense of pride from my mother and my brother. So that was kind of nice. I felt some kind of pride for the family over my accomplishments and what I was doing. Yeah. Everybody else has it. The funny thing, Jim, is everybody else has their life pieced together now. All of my half siblings now know the complete story. And the guy who wanted to kind of find out the complete story is the only one that doesn't know, and that's me now. So it's kind of strange. It's kind of how a very, very funny twist.
Well, you're remarkably well adjusted considering. I guess you don't have a choice. It's either that or you're...
Well, that's it.
Go out of your mind.
No, life's been really, really good. It's been a very nice existence. My wife is one of the best women that I would have ever met. We have a nice family, accomplished kid. Emily's doing really well, so that's a good sense of pride for me. The fact that it ended up in a good note, and I'm still have my faculties, and I'm still doing okay. So life is good. You just have to give it a chance to get there sometime.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Very generous of you to do this. So I appreciate it.
My pleasure.